Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to this Scottish Society for Northern Studies seminar, which is being given today by Stephen Barnaby. Stephen has very kindly offered to give a talk for us, and Stephen grew up in Caithness, so I suppose this topic is quite close to his heart. And in Caithness, he developed a fascination with all things Viking, and he currently lives in East Lothian. But last year, Stephen completed his MLit in Viking studies with the University of the Highlands and Islands. Good choice, if I do say so myself. Um, his dissertation concerned the role of Caithness in the demise of the Northern Scottish Norse earldoms or jarldoms. Um, he has since given talks on that same subject in Caithness and will be giving a talk tonight titled Bishop's Butter and Beer Cellars, The Role of Caithness in the Demise of the Northern Jarldoms, which is a fantastic title in my opinion. And he's also going to be giving a talk on this topic at the International Medieval Congress in Leeds this July. So it's nice to introduce you, Stephen, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, and thanks for SSNS for having me, and for everybody for tuning in. Yes, that is absolutely right. I am Stephen Barnaby, and I did graduate with the MLit in Viking Studies last year, and it was great. And you get to graduate in St Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall, which is fantastic. So if that doesn't sell it to you, nothing will. And yes, my dissertation was, as you may have guessed, on the role of Caithness in the demise of the Northern Scottish Jarldoms or Norse earldoms. Um, and yeah, my interest is that I grew up in Caithness. I grew up in Thurso, the furthest north town on the Scottish mainland. You may not know what a Caithness accent sounds like, but you've probably guessed it isn't like this. And that's because when I was two, my dad was posted, not literally, but my dad was posted up to work at Dounreay, the atomic energy place up there. So that's right. I come from a nuclear family, and because so many people moved up at that point, it wasn't that unusual to hear English accents and children with their English accents, parents, English accents. Um, so that is my Caithness connection. And like many people with a Caithness connection, I tend to think of it as a bit of a kind of unknown or neglected or forgotten about sort of kind of area. And similarly, I think within the Norse world, the sort of northern Scottish Norse world, I think its role tends to be downplayed in comparison with that of Orkney and Shetland, which we tend to far more associate with these kind of northern Jarldoms. So I'm here to put that right by flying the faux Scandi uh, 2016 established Caithness flag, and try and put that right. Now, as that flag gives a bit of a hint, there is quite a lot of sort of pride in Caithness's Norse heritage in Caithness. I'll actually, for my next little slide, if I can actually do this. Right. Oh, there we go. Now, just in case you weren't quite sure where Caithness was, there it is. And there's Thurso, where I grew up, and there is Dounreay, where my dad worked. So here we go, taking Norse pride too far. This happened in 2013, I believe, in just outside Wick Airport, where bullets were shot through a recently erected sort of Gallic sign, because there are those in Caithness who fly into a fury at the notion that there was any kind of Gallic culture ever in Caithness, despite the very many Gallic place names there. But you'll be pleased to know I am not one of those gun-toting Norsophiles, but I do intend trying to sort of make the case for Caithness here. Um, so the first question I was to be asked, in my opinion, is how do we know what we think we know about these northern Scottish, these Norse Jarldoms? And the first thing to say there is that it's not from Scottish sources, at least not for the vast majority of the history of these Jarldoms, because there's pretty much no surviving Scottish writings of any sort from before about the 12th century. So we're looking at Icelandic sources mainly from the sort of so-called saga writing age and era, which sort of begins kind of the 12th century, probably peaks in the 13th century, goes through to the 14th. And in particular, we'll be looking at a saga, which I shall bring up a picture of here. Now, misleadingly titled work on my Caithness bookshelf. Logistically, I couldn't have an impressive looking bookshelf behind me for this talk, so you have to settle for my slightly shambolic looking kitchen. But the Orkney Inga saga, you can see in the middle there, that's the copy I bought in the sadly long defunct bookshop in Thurso. Orkney Inga saga translates literally as the saga of the people of Orkney. It wasn't called that at the time. It was a name that's kind of been sort of evolved somewhere down the line. But Saga of the People of Orkney, it is not. A more accurate title would be the one used by Judith Yesh in her translation from last year, The Saga of the Earls of Orkney. But an even more accurate title would be The Saga of the Earls of Orkney, Shetland, and there we go, Caithness. Um, so what the first thing to say is that the earlier parts of the saga, when you're looking at probably the late ninth century, going into the 10th century, are not massively reliable. I mean, these are things, events, and people that were supposedly around about 300 years before it was being written about. But nonetheless, what we're told in the saga initially is that the Jarldoms are set up these northern Scottish areas settled in the time of King Harold Hawafari of Norway. Now, Hawafari translates possibly as fine hair or fair hair, or possibly he's worth it hair. There he is in a kind of 14th century kind of manuscript. He's a slightly sort of shady sort of figure, in as much as that the Icelandic sagas present him as the man who unified Norway in a rather kind of violent authoritarian manner, because it was there were lots of petty kings ruling in different parts of Norway, and he kind of forcibly unified it. And freedom-loving, independent Icelanders then left Norway and went to Iceland, where they set up the freedom-loving, independent Republic of Iceland. It wasn't especially free, but it didn't have a king. So he's kind of Iceland's creation myth, really, and it's we don't even know if he really existed at all, or if he did, whether he was anything more than just a petty king. But he is in our saga at the start, and he's kind of responsible, we are told, for the Norse settlement of Orkney and Shetland, because he is annoyed by a party of Vikings, Norse Vikings or pirates, who are basing themselves in Orkney over the winter and then raiding Norway in the summer, which seems like the kind of opposite way round of how we normally associate these things. So he sweeps down on Orkney, not on his own. He has his army with him, and he sort of conquers Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles, and he sets up. He establishes the earldom of Orkney and creates the title of Earl of Orkney, gives it to his associate Rognvalda of Møre, who doesn't want it, and gives it to his brother Siorda. And we're then told that Siorda conquers the north of Scotland down as far as Ekjalsbakki, which is sort of the River Oikel, probably sort of Murrayfirth, Dornoch area, before he memorably is killed after winning a battle against a Norse Gaelic earl called Melbrigta. He's riding away from this battle with Melbrigta's decapitated head hanging from his saddle. A tooth from Melbrigta's head gashes his leg, which becomes infected, and he dies and is buried in a mound near the River Oikel. I have managed to find a wonderfully accurate representation of this incident. There we go. So there's Mel Briggs's head. It's quite an accurate depiction of Dornoch weather, at least. The rest of it I'm not sure about. But you may think that doesn't sound like a terribly credible mode of death, but as for whether he did die and was buried there, there is a farm, still a farm, near Dornoch called Cider Hall. I have a kind of snowy aerial picture of it here, I do believe. There we go. Cider Hall Farm. And Cider Hall is recorded in a 12th century Scottish document as Sivard Hoch, which derives from the Norse Sia the Hoya, which means Sia there's how. So that doesn't necessarily prove that Sia there was buried there, but it does at least suggest there was a long-standing local tradition of somebody notable called Sia the being buried around there. So I choose to believe that that is Sia the Jarl of Orkney. I also choose to believe he died from an infected tooth from Melbrigta's head. So there we go. And the most significant part of this story for our purposes is it establishes Caithness as part of the Norse world. Now, if you know your geography, you will be saying, right, here we go, there's Cider Hall Farm down there, there's Dornoch, there's River Oikel. You will be saying, well, what's that got to do with Caithness? Because that's all in the southern part of the historic county of Sutherland. Which brings us to the question of what was Caithness in the Norse era. And Caithness included Sutherland in this time. Sutherland was a distinct part of it, presumably more Gaelic in its culture and language, but it was nonetheless a part of Caithness in this time. The predominance of Norse settlement, Norse place names, comes more in the sort of northern and eastern coasts of modern Caithness there. And Caithness itself, the word Caithness, comes from the Norse Caithness, headland of the cat, and the cat means not the furry, purry animal. It means the Pictish peoples who lived in Caithness and Sutherland, probably the Northern Isles too. Slightly confusingly, it seems the early Gaelic term for for Shetland was Insa Cat, the islands of the cat, but Orkney were Insa Ork, the islands of the Orcs, and Orcs we think was a kind of Pictish word meaning wild boar, possibly, or pigs. But the cat was certainly in Caithness and Sutherland. They were Pictish, but they were quite possibly, by the time the Norse arrived, they quite possibly would have been speaking Gaelic and their culture becoming more Gaelic as sort of happened with the Pictish peoples gradually in the areas in which they predominated in Scotland, that they kind of became absorbed into Gaelic culture. But for all that, the knowledge of there having been the Pictish peoples there is reflected in the fact that the Norse named the stretch of water between the far north of Scotland and Orkney as Pietland's Fjorda, the Firth of the Picts, and the Pentland Firth, as it became. As I say, the predominance of Norse names is in the sort of northern and eastern coasts of Caithness, of modern Caithness. For instance, the town in which I grew up, Thurso, from Thorsor, which literally means Thor's River. There's also the idea that it might be Thiorsor, Bull River, because the second century Greco-Roman writer Ptolemy, who was never in Caithness, it has to be said, referred to a place called Tarvedonum, Bull Fort, somewhere near Thurso. The problem with the whole river idea, though, is that the Norse called Thurso Skinandi, the Shining One, which is also the name of a nightclub in Thurso, which we can verify doesn't date back to Viking times, though it may be no stranger to early medieval behaviour. I couldn't comment. It was Flicks when I was there, and before that it was a cinema. But I digress. The other main town in Caithness is Thurso's historic sworn enemy, Wick, which comes from Vik, bay or inlet. There are many villages in Caithness, particularly on, and that's a northern eastern coastal bit, ending with stir, such as Scrabster, Leibster, Ulbster. And the stir comes from the Norse Bolstava, meaning farm or dwelling place. Sutherland comes from the Norse term Sutherland, meaning southern land, the southern part of the Norse territories. It would have come as news to my parents that any part of where they were was southern. They thought they were in the Arctic Circle. And there are quite a lot of Caithness dialect words which have a Norse root. I'll particularly mention scorri from scori, meaning Norse scori, meaning young gull, which I particularly associate with being at Wick Airport and in a taxi and hearing gunshots and the taxi driver saying, "You're just scaring any scories off your runway," as opposed to they're just firing bullets through Gaelic signs, I suppose. Um, Now, here we go. Here's another little digression. So, the cat, the province of the cat. Now, the people, the cat, can be found in the Gaelic term for Sutherland, cate, whereas the Gaelic term for Caithness is Galli, which means province of the strangers or foreigners. And these words can still occasionally be found and heard in Caithness and Sutherland that the inhabitants of Caithness are the Galachs and Sutherland are the Catachs. Now, this foreigner and stranger bit comes from Gal, Gaelic term for stranger or foreigner, which tended to be used in relation to the Norse peoples. So in Segal, the islands of the strangers and foreigners, means the Western Isles, as they were heavily Norse settled and ruled, essentially. There's also the term Gal Gaday, referring to sort of Gaelic-speaking strangers or foreigners, which essentially means Norse people who were now speaking Gaelic, probably bilingual, and it's the possibly the basis for Galloway in the southwest of Scotland. So there we go. There's a bit of Gaelic and Catach action for you there. So here we see some of the places to which I refer. For some reason, I've got Thurso and Wick in smaller letters than all the other ones, despite them being the biggest places. But anyway, so there's Thurso and Wick. We have the Leibster, Ulpster, Scrabster. There are many other stirs around. Um, Anywhere with Dale, Calderdale, Helmsdale, Dale. I'll come back to what Dale is later. That comes from the Norse Dala, just like the same thing as in the Yorkshire Dales. Um, in terms of archaeology, there is archaeological evidence for Caithness, Norse settlements in Caithness. Nowhere near as much as you would find in Orkney or Shetland, though. That's partly possibly because of coastal erosion wearing away these settlements. Partly possibly they just weren't as densely settled by the Norse as Orkney and Shetland. Also, just an awful lot more archaeology goes on in Orkney in particular, so you're more likely to unearth Norse things while looking for other things. But having said that the early parts of the saga are not that reliable, um, there are Norse burials sites that have been found in Caithness for example, Ray, Castletown, Wester Seat, which do appear to date from sort of late 9th, early 10th century, which does actually fit in with what the saga is saying about when the settlement occurred during the supposed rule of Harold Hawafari. Um, right, what is my next slide? Yes, now I'm jumping ahead of myself here, really, because looking at the saga, the early parts of the saga, as I say, it's not necessarily hugely reliable in terms of the details of the people and the events, but it does establish for Caithness certain very clear repeated roles. One is as the place where the Norse, kind of Norwegian Norse and Gaelic Scottish worlds clash, very literally in the sense of our friend Mel Brigter there, his tooth and Siorda's leg. And that seems credible enough that these Norse interlopers would meet some fairly outraged resistance from the locals. However, it's also a place where the Norse and Gaelic worlds combine and meet and interact. And we have from certainly from about the late 990s, probably, we have instances of elite Norse families and elite Gaelic families intermarrying for sort of mutual alliances and benefit, which sounds very credible. That's how the world worked then, quite possibly still is. Um, the first instance we have of that really in the saga is with another Jarl Siorda. This is Siorda the Stout, and he is certainly a credible figure because he's the first Earl of Orkney to be recorded anywhere really. Of the first time the actual title Earl of Orkney is recorded, which is in an Irish, so contemporary Irish source, which was describing his death at the Battle of Clontarf in Ireland in 1014, which is also recorded in the Orkneyinga saga, and more extensively actually in Njaal's saga as well. So he is a credible figure, and we are told in the saga that he marries the daughter of King Malcolm II of Scotland. Problem with that is there wasn't really anything approaching what we would, think of a king of what we would now think of as Scotland till King David the First in the 12th century. So he may have married the daughter of King Malcolm II of the somewhat smaller realm of Alba. However, it's possibly even more likely that he married the daughter of a different Malcolm, probably an earl of somewhere like Moray or Ross, Argyll, one of the realms that was in constant strife with Alba, in fact. So it may be that he married for protection against Alba rather than alliance with it, so to speak. Um, and what follows on from this interaction between, or this intermarriage between Norse and Gaelic elite families, which we see more so, probably see particularly in the later part here in the 12th century, is that you have a lot of Jarls who grow up in these kind of bilingual Gaelic Norse households in northern Scotland. So this kind of hybrid thing is happening from relatively early, and Sia the son Thorfinna is the first one we see is mentioned as growing up in such a kind of bilingual Gaelic Norse household. Is growing up in his grandfather Malcolm's estate, essentially. Another thing that is established quite early on is that the the Jarldom of Caithness is separate from the Jarldoms in Orkney and Shetland. And that whereas you need the validation of the King of Norway or a King of Norway to be Jarl in Orkney and Shetland, you need the validation of a Scottish elite figure to be the Jarl of Caithness. And we're always told it's the King of Scotland, but as I was saying, there wasn't really anything approaching a King of Scotland as we would understand it till the 12th century. So again, they're probably getting the title of Jarl of Caithness from um, another elite Scottish figure, probably an Earl of Moray or an Earl of Ross, quite possibly. Now, the other thing that is established quite early on with Caithness as well is it's a place where jarls and different jarldom candidates fight and kill each other. I have a list of now we have seven jarls who the saga at least records as dying violently in Caithness. Now, the last three of those uh, are very credible. First four probably slightly shadier, but certainly the last three we can say definitely happened. I would think the first four. I mean, as I say, it's not unlikely that Jarls should have been fighting and killing each other in Caithness, because one of the things with Caithness, and one of the reasons I think it was so significant within the Jarldoms, is because it was sort of relatively distanced from the centres of power in Norway and in Scotland. Kings of Norway, generally speaking, were bothered about Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles, and didn't really regard Caithness as part of their territory. There are sort of exceptions there. There are some interferences and interlopings by Norwegian kings sometimes, but by and large, they were more bothered with the islands. And as I say, there wasn't a Scottish king as such before the 12th century. So Caithness was it often seemed a bit of a lawless kind of no man's land area. Some would say it still is. And that made it quite an attractive place for Jarls to be kind of struggling for power, and it was a very good place to base yourself if you were plotting to be overall Jarl, because we frequently have two or three Jarls ruling at the same time, and it's never the territories are never divided up in a logical way. You don't have one, ruling Caithness and one ruling Orkney and one ruling Shetland. It never seems to work like that. It's always more fragmented where they're ruling, parts and bits of it. But the overall plan generally is to try and sort of see off your rivals and become Jarl of the whole shebang. And what you will tend to do then is relocate to Orkney, the administrative centre of the Jarldoms, and probably leave Caithness in the hands of a brutal and violent steward. And this is going on well into the 12th century, when we have the memorable figure of Svein Asleifsson, who the saga writers love. They glory in depicting him in all of his kind of backstabbing, side-switching, self-serving, murderous glory. And then when he finally dies on a raid in Dublin, they declare him to be the greatest man the Western world has ever known, apart from those of higher rank than himself. So a nice little bit of snobbery to qualify it there. And just to give an idea of the sort of rough and ready characters who the Jarls saw it as a good idea to put in charge of Caithness as stewards. I've managed from all available evidence to piece together a picture of what Svein Leifsson looked like. So here he is. That's Svein Leifsson. That is the kind of person who was left in charge of Caithness in the Jarldom times. Right, that's a bit too terrifying, so I'll move on to my next picture because because we will leap forward to the 12th century. As I mentioned, David the First is the first king of something resembling Scotland, if you like. There he is, looking amazingly like a Lewis chess piece. So I'll give you a more accurate picture of him there, especially the serpents. He always had two intertwining serpents by his throne, of course. Um, and King David really, I'm saying King of Scotland. You would probably have said he more started off as King of Alba. Right, here we go. Scotland in the early 12th century. So Alba, um, it's a slightly vaguely defined territory, but it's if you drew a line from the Forth to the Clyde, and then sort of went up to Moray was a lot bigger then than it is now. Sort of went up about here, I suppose. So that kind of area is Alba. Um, but King David, and this was in line with what a lot of European kings were doing around this time, which was greatly expanding their ambitions and their power and their territories and their realms. And they were often doing this in the company of a strongman bishop. Um, because around this time, the kings may have been getting more ambitious and more powerful. So was the church. The church was really, extending its power, and the church was extremely useful to kings because the church gave you a kind of ready-made administrative structure and really good tax raising powers, of course, as well. So if you're after more power and dominance and wealth and so forth, being in with the church was a really good idea. Um, so David, he conquers various territories. He sort of takes over Moray and Ross, although Moray and Ross do remain pretty problematic for Scottish kings for a long time. But he sort of conquers them. And he sets his eyes also on Caithness and also on Orkney in Shetland. And so he partly does this through, well, in Caithness, or probably more Sutherland, by granting land to his fellow Norman Scottish aristocrats. But also he invents the bishopric of Caithness. He invents the role of the bishop of Caithness. Uh, Initially, this is possibly sort of window dressing because the first bishop that he installs, Bishop Andrew, quite possibly never came to Caithness. But it's a very provocative gesture. This because up to this point, the Caithness fell within the ambit of the Norse Bishop of Orkney. So for King David to declare that there is now a Scottish appointed Bishop of Caithness and this new bishopric of Caithness, it's provocative of the Bishop of Orkney, but also, of course, Orkney is essentially the territory of the King of Norway, so it's provocative in that respect too. Um, for all this, though, King David is not in a position to impose a Scottish earl in Caithness. He hasn't got the power to be doing that yet. But what he can do is promote his own favoured choice of Norse earl, Norse jarl, for Caithness. And as I say, he's looking towards Orkney and Shetland as well. So that brings me to this fellow, again looking remarkably like a Lewis chess figure. Um, Haralda Maddathason, who, as you can see, was around for a very long time, and he's a very significant figure in our story here. Um, his father was the Gallic Earl of Athol. His Norsified kind of name there is Madather. His name was probably Matad or Matak, and he is mentioned in several Scottish charters in the 12th century. So he's a credible figure, and he was a close ally of King David. The saga says he was King David's cousin. We don't know if that's the case, but he was certainly a close ally. So that is going to make Harald an attractive figure, if you like, to David in terms of a future Jarl. The reason why he's a candidate for a future Jarl is that because on his mother's side he's descended from various Jarls of Orkney, stroke Shetland, stroke Caithness. However, his mother's side is also very interesting because it's a mixed Norse Gaelic side story on his mother's side, which brings in a fascinating family, which is the family of Modan of Dale. Modan of Dale, we are told, is a large Gaelic landowner. When I say large, I don't mean he's large, obviously, but a Gaelic sort of landowner in Caithness, who is a powerful figure. Um, as for where Dale is, Modern of Dale, I think there's various kind of debates about it. I think, but I believe that current consensus is it's somewhere around here, I think, sort of slap bang in the middle of modern Caithness. But here's the thing for one of my claims for the importance of Caithness, certainly when you're looking at this later period of the Jarldom. So we have here Modern of Dale in Caithness. With one exception, every single Jarl from here on in, over the period of about a century, really, sort of about 1139 to 1231, is descended from Modern of Dale. I'll draw your attention also to his daughter, Frakirk. His children have a mixture of sort of Norse and Gaelic names. With like Angus, we have there, and Hauken and Thorleif. Ottar Jarl, who apparently we're told is the Jarl of Thurso, which seems to be a unique post. But anyway, I'll go back to Frakirk. Frakirk is a frustratingly thinly drawn figure because she's in the saga. What I should say is that this whole the whole Modern of Dale family, or Modern himself and his kind of direct descendants, his children at least, they're not recorded anywhere else, not even in any other Icelandic source. However, they do live, and their influence extends close enough to the writing of the earliest prototypes and shortish versions of the saga in maybe the 1170s or thereabouts, and even going into the 12th century. His family's influence extends close enough to living memory, or the time that the sagas, or the information for the sagas is being compiled, for them to be credible figures. Anyway, Frakirk. So, as I say, she's a bit frustratingly thinly drawn in the saga, but she's clearly a very important figure. She's a sort of kingmaker or jarl maker and breaker. At least she seems to be involved quite a lot in establishing who will be jarl at various points. Seems to have people ask her advice a lot and so forth. She bases herself around about Helmsdale, in Helmsdale, and possibly kind of polices the border almost, between the internal border between Caithness and Sutherland, and maybe controls trade and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, though, the saga rather portrays her as one of these villainous, scheming women who are a bit of a staple figure in Icelandic saga culture. And so we have the memorable episode, another memorable episode, where Frakka and her sister Helga accidentally kill their chosen candidate for the Earldom, Earl Haralda Smooth Talker or Smooth Tongue, because he puts on the poisoned shirt that they had intended for his rival. And of course, he dies. And I have a picture of him. Here we go. Harold Smooth Tongue's poisoned shirt, death throes. Well, I have to come clean with this picture because he supposedly died. Well, he did die. I don't mean any doubt that he died. Probably not through putting on a poison shirt. He died in Orkney. You may notice there are quite a lot of trees in that picture, which makes it unlikely that it's in Orkney, and that's because this is actually a picture of Hercules, who also died through putting on a poison shirt that was meant for someone else. And I would rather guess that might be where the saga writers got the idea from for Haralda's unfortunate death. So, yes, if only we knew more about Frakirk. But to return to our man, Haralda Madadason. So, King David wants him as his man, as his man in Caithness, Orkney, Shetland. And so when Haralda was only 5 years old, King David gets another of these strong men, bishops. We're told it's Bishop John of Athol, but there wasn't a Bishop of Athol. But there was a Bishop John of Glasgow, who was a very close ally of King David. So he gets Bishop John of Glasgow, so we are told in the saga, to basically travel to not just to Caithness, but also to Orkney, and to announce that Haralda, when he becomes an adult, will have half of the Jarldoms of all the Jarldoms, half the Jarldom of Caithness, half of Orkney, half of Shetland. So again, it's incredibly provocative for a King of Scotland to be going actually into Orkney to start, or sending a representative there to actually be telling them who is going to be Jarl or half a Jarl, if there's such a thing as half a Jarl. And so when Haralda does reach adulthood and comes into his Jarldoms, the King of Norway, who at this point is this chap, looking surprisingly sensitive amidst the foliage there. That is King Eystein Haraldsson. Uh, Now, kings of Norway are clearly not going to be very happy with King David's ambitions towards Orkney and Shetland and so forth. So, Eystein he descends on Orkney again, not on his own. He takes an army with him, and looking for our friend Jarl Haralda in Orkney. He doesn't find him in Orkney, but he's told he's in my old hometown of Thurso. So he nips across the Pentland Firth to Thurso. He kidnaps Haralda. He forces him to redeem himself with 3 gold marks and a pledge of lifelong allegiance, which thus effectively removes Haralda as King David's man. And although Eystein did, as I say, look for Haralda in Orkney initially, I think it's quite telling that he thought nothing really about nipping over the Pentland Firth to Caithness, which should really have been more King David's territory, really. Um, but I think that shows, well, he was thumbing his nose at David, I dare say, but also I think it shows that he realised David's power within Caithness was not great, and so it is still somewhat this kind of no man's land. Now, although Haralda has lost the support of King David, and indeed he then loses the support of the King of Norway too. About 5 years later, he has achieved the position of being overall Jarl of the whole lot of Caithness and Orkney and Shetland, and he's done this in the time-honoured way of basing himself in Caithness and plotting the demise of the other two jarls. He gets together with one of them, Rognvalda Kali Colson, to arrange the murder of the first jarl, Lenda. And then Rognvald Kali Colson himself is killed while Haralda plays a suspiciously non-interventionist role. And Rognvalda is killed in Caithness. He's killed in Caithness in, I think I have a map. So he's killed, we are told, in Calderdale, in a farm near a farm called Forsey. And it's described the landscape and the geography is described very accurately, and the point is made by a previous translator of the saga, A.B. Taylor, in the 1930s, that generally, he thinks in the saga, the descriptions of the geography in Caithness are more accurate than the descriptions of the geography in Orkney and Shetland, which rather would suggest that a lot of the people providing the source material for the various different versions of the saga that were assembled were Caithness based, or were people who had better knowledge of Caithness than Orkney and Sutherland. So there we go. Shall I get my flag out again? There we go. Yeah, so again, I think that's part of my. Oops, something just fell down there. That's part of my argument for the significance of Caithness, particularly in this later part, which is that there seems to be something of a Caithness basis to a lot of the information we're getting in the saga, particularly in the more accurate or the more credible stuff towards the end in the 12th and 13th centuries. Haralda was around for a long time, as I say, but he manages to increasingly set himself up as a bit of an adversary of the kings of Scotland and to a degree, to an extent, Norway too. Probably around about the time that King David dies, Jarl Haralda sets aside, or if you prefer, dumps his first wife. His first wife was the daughter of the Earl of Fife, who was a close ally of King David. And instead, he marries the daughter of probably the Earl of Ross, Malcolm MacHeath, who was in constant conflict with the Scottish crown. So I would argue that Haraldr's marriages were both kind of motivated by the desire of control for the Scottish mainland part of his territory, Caithness, because I think his first marriage was to get King David's support for him to be Jarl of Caithness, and looking towards Orkney and Shetland as well, of course. Whereas his second marriage, I think, was more to gain protection against these increasingly ambitious Scottish kings. Um, but he also falls out with the King of Norway in a big way. The King of Norway by now is this chap, King Sverrir Sigurðsson, looking very literally stony faced there, and that's from Nidaros Cathedral in Norway, and I think that is actually a contemporary carving of him in about 1200, I do believe. Anyway, Jarl Haraldr backs an effort to overthrow Sverrir, and this involves a boatload of Orcadian aristocrats heading off to Norway. Whoops. To take part in the effort to overthrow Sverrir. These aristocrats were known as the Earskeggjar, and this has been widely translated down the years as the Island Beardies, which is a fantastic name. Um, Sadly, that I believe is a chap from up Heliar in Shetland in 1953 or thereabouts, wearing a fantastic, utterly authentic winged helmet, of course, there. Um, and Spoilsport Judith Yesh, in her translation last year of the Orkneyinga saga, pointed out that it's Earskeggjar probably actually just translates as island dwellers. Boo hiss, but I'll choose to believe they were the Island Beardies. Anyway, they lost. They failed to overthrow King Sverrir, and King Sverrir was absolutely furious with Jarl Haraldr. He basically took control of Shetland. He took Shetland away from the control of the Jarls of Orkney and Shetland and Caithness. He imposed a steward on Orkney. So things not going well with the King of Norway then for Haraldr, but he basically in the later part of his very long time as Jarl, he falls particularly badly foul of the King of Scotland, who by now is William the Lion, with his amazing leonine beard there. Not that lions have beards, but you know what I mean. I think that's actually a 16th century picture of him or thereabouts. William the Lion is not amused by the fact that Haraldr is connected to the Earl of Ross, who is always revolting against the King of Scotland. And William the First, we are told in the saga, and elsewhere as well, actually, we're starting to have Scottish sources now corroborating things. He sweeps into Caithness in the 1190s and causes widespread devastation. He apparently destroys Thurso Castle, which is presumably why, as with most of the historic castles in Caithness, you can't find a stone of it anywhere. Although somebody told me that they think they found stones of it in Thurso River, possibly. But again, he's not actually in a position to impose a Scottish Earl on Caithness yet. But again, what he can do is back his own chosen Norse Jarl candidate, who confusingly is yet another Haraldr. He's Haraldr Ungi, Harold the Young. There we are. Who again is from the Modern of Dale family. He was born and he was raised in Caithness, I believe, and he apparently had very strong support in Caithness, and somewhat inevitably his forces and the forces of Haraldr Madarsson fought each other in Caithness, the result of which was that Harold the Young was killed. We are told in the saga that he is considered a saint in Caithness and that all sorts of miracles happened after he died. Now, interestingly, many years later, two much later historians of Caithness, the Reverend Alexander Pope of Ray in 1780 and James T. Calder in 1861, they say that amongst the people of Caithness at that time, Harold the Young was still regarded as a saint, and whereas the other Harald Medadderson, was regarded as Wicked Earl Harold, the scourge of Caithness. And Alexander Pope, I think, was behind Sir John Sinclair, who was the main man, the head man in Caithness at the time, building Harold's Tower. Here we go. Right. So Harold's Tower, there's a rather poor, blurry picture of it there. Um, Harold's Tower is just outside Thurso, and it was supposedly built on the spot where Harold the Young died. The saga doesn't specify where this battle took place. However, um, there's another Icelandic source and a Scottish one which say the battle happened in Wick. So there's not really any reason to believe that Harold's Tower is anywhere near where Harold died. But there you go. There is Harold's Tower. Now, this I will now move on to our first major episode of bishop abuse here, which is the mutilation of Bishop John of Caithness. And Haralda Medadderson apparently thought that Bishop John had been bad-mouthing him to the King of Scotland, to King William the Lion, and saying that Haralda was involved in plots against him, which he almost certainly was. So Haralda ordered that Bishop John of Caithness be seized outside his castle in Scrabster, which is just you can see from my mum's window. It's the so Thurso sort of harbour area. Well, it's a couple of miles down from Thurso. And Scrabster Castle, in this great tradition of Caithness castles I was talking about, there we go. It's there. That's what's left of that sort of lump is what's left of Scrabster Castle. That obviously isn't it. That's a World War II lookout. Incidentally, that is Dunnet Head, the furthest north part of the Scottish mainland, not John O'Groats, Dunnet Head. That's the Orkney Island of Hoy. That's a bit of Thurso, but I digress. Now, I gave this talk in Thurso, and I said that we actually have an artist's impression of what Scrabster Castle looked like, and it was this. And a few people believed me, and there was a Q&A afterwards where they said, I didn't realise Scrabster Castle looked like that. It didn't. So anyway, John of Caithness, he has his Bishop John of Caithness, he has his tongue slit open, probably symbolic of his loose tongue telling tales on Jarl Haralda. Haralda has lots of his followers killed. He takes brutal revenge on anybody in Caithness he thinks has been agitating against him. Finds the Caithness free farmers. He makes them swear oaths of allegiance to him. Maybe this is why the whole Wicked Earl Harold idea is sort of drifts down the centuries. King William is furious that his bishop, his Scots appointed bishop, has been mutilated. But again, he can't actually get rid of Jarl Haralda. He does fine him. He takes his son hostage, who later dies minus eyes and genitals, but he doesn't manage to actually get rid of Haralda. Haralda eventually dies in 1206. He was in his 70s by then. He was clearly a real survivor. Do I have another picture of him? Oh no, I don't. I'll get back to that. He was clearly a real survivor, and an awful lot of his time was spent basically holding on to Caithness. And I would like to think that that's because, as well as the fact that the King of Scotland's ambitions meant it was inevitable he was doing a lot to try and hold on to Caithness. I'd like to think, Caithness had a special place in his heart, if he had a heart, because of his sort of hybrid background, his Northern Scottish kind of Gaelic stroke Norse kind of background, and because he spent so much time in Caithness. Anyway, he leaves Caithness to his sons, Jon and Davith. Davith sadly dies of illness after a few years, and at this point, Ogni saga, or the saga, ends, and we're now reliant on other Icelandic sources and some Scottish and English ones. So his son Jon apparently only now manages to hold on to Caithness by giving his daughter as hostage to King William the Lion. And he also William now, it seems, does take control of Sutherland. So Sutherland, this is the point at which Sutherland is starting to, be disengaged from Caithness, if you like, and becoming a separate place. And also, Jon, it appears, only manages to keep control of Orkney by giving his son as hostage to the King of Norway, who is now the chap I briefly showed you before, Haukenassen. So he gives his son to Hauken as a hostage, and he rather suspiciously drowns not long afterwards, leaving Jon without an heir. Also, Hauken imposes a steward on Orkney called Haunevra. Now, so this is going to bring us shortly up to the second major episode of bishop abuse, which is the burning of Bishop Adam of Caithness. Yes, somebody else did want to be Bishop of Caithness after Bishop John. Now, why have I? Oh, yes, I know. I've got this picture here. Bishop Adam of Caithness, he was there in now Holkirk, which comes from the Norse Haukirkja, High Church. Holkirk was the seat of the Caithness bishopric, and Bishop Adam was there. And he raised the tithe of butter on the free farmers of Caithness, and they were furious. And so they went to the Jarl Jon, to try and get his support against Bishop Adam raising the tithe of butter. Now, there's this memorable quote doesn't appear in any sort of Icelandic sources, but if we go again to the Reverend Alexander Pope in 1780 and James D. Calder in 1861, according to them, Jon's reply to the farmers was, "The devil take the bishop and his butter. You may roast him if you please." And I've helpfully provided a picture of a bishop being roasted in a barrel of butter, because one of the stories down the years was that they roasted him in a barrel of butter. Actually, the Icelandic account of what happens said that the more militant elements among the Caithness farmers, they chased Bishop Adam into a house in Holkirk and set fire to the house and burnt him to death. This is really unusual. It has to be pointed out that to have two bishops, so this gives some idea of just what a very wild place Caithness was. That two bishops should within this period, within about 20 odd years, because 1201 and then 1222 this happened, should suffer such indignities, and fatally in Adam's case. Apparently, Adam, this is the only case of in Europe of a bishop being killed because of trying to raise tithes. So there we go. There's a proud boast for Caithness. Some sources say that Jon, yes, because the devil take the bishop and his butter, you may roast him if you please. That was supposed to be a kind of Thomas à Becket, Henry II, who will rid me of this turbulent priest type quote. Another quote that was invented in the 18th century, apparently. So it was supposed to be a kind of I'm washing my hands of this man, not a literal command. Other sources say that Jon was more involved, but either way, obviously the King of Scotland was going to be absolutely furious that the Scots appointed bishop had just been burned alive in Holkirk. And the King of Scotland by this time is this chap Alexander II. So he carries out a brutal revenge on anyone he thinks was involved in the burning of Bishop Adam. Which one source tells us that 80 people had their hands and feet cut off and died as a result. And the Pope was thrilled. The Pope loved the brutality of Alexander's response to this. And also, do you know what? I got ahead of myself when I said that William the Lion took Sutherland off Jarl Jon. It was actually Alexander II. Now, after the burning of Bishop Adam, it was actually under Alexander II that Jarl Jon lost control of Sutherland. And also, the bishop who replaced Adam, yes, there was another one who wanted to be Bishop of Caithness. He very sensibly moved the seat of the bishopric. So he moved it from Falkirk down to Dornoch, right at the far south of Sutherland, which is a power gesture because it brings the seat of the power closer to the seat of royal power in Scotland. But also, you'd imagine it's just a bit safer for the Bishop of Caithness to be in Dornoch. Being in Caithness did not seem to go well for them. Um, so that is where we. So at the moment, then Bjorn is clearly uh, under massive pressure from the King of Scotland, ever more pressure, uh, and the King of Norway too is a bit of a nuisance to him as well with the steward imposed in Orkney. So this is bringing us to the final part. You'll be glad to hear because I've been speaking for a long time, which is the death of the final one of the Norse line of Scottish Jarls, the death of Jarl Jon. And what happens here is that a rival claimant to the Jarldom emerges in Orkney, a man called Snækolla Gunnarsson, who is the great grandson of another Jarl of Ronvalda Kali Colson, who was killed in Caithness, if you recall, if I haven't lost you all. Anyway, he's Ronvalda's great grandson, and he demands Ronvalda's share of the Jarldoms. Jarl Jon tells him where to go, and then for reasons that are never quite explained in the Icelandic sources, um, the three of them, Jarl Jon, Snækolla Gunnarsson, and Haunevra, the Norwegian king's steward, all set off for Thurso, my old hometown. And when they get there, lots of drunken arguments and paranoia ensue. And this culminates in Haunevra, the Norwegian steward, and his men chasing Jarl Jon down into a beer cellar in Thurso. And I'll return again to this extremely accurate representation of a 13th century Thurso beer cellar. And Jon is stabbed repeatedly and killed in this cellar next to lots of barrels of beer. Excuse me. This was in about 1231. And thus ends the Norse line of Jarls in my old hometown. And I think it kind of encapsulates things for me. Because if I were just to summarize my argument here as to the role of Caithness and the importance of Caithness in the demise of the Northern Scottish Jarldoms, um, I would say that's because, as I've mentioned, Caithness occupied this position where it was where the Norwegian Norse worlds and the Gaelic Scots worlds met and combined and interacted most fiercely and sometimes fiercely, sometimes in a more cooperative manner. And it was a bit of a melting pot, a bit of a cultural melting pot. But also initially, as I say, it occupied this position of being relatively safe from the centres of power in Norway, because the King of Norway wasn't that interested, and Scotland, because there wasn't a King of Scotland. But as the Kings of Scotland got more and more powerful, the Kings of Norway were getting pretty ambitious too, but the biggest danger came from the King of Scotland. I would say that Caithness became the kind of stress point, the kind of fracture point of the Jarldoms. And to me, it seems very fitting that the last of the Norse line of Jarls dies in Caithness, and he dies, which he dies in what should be the King of Scotland's territory, but at the hands of the steward of the King of Norway. So a more literal representation of that kind of squeeze on Caithness you could hardly have. And I would again mention the whole thing about Modern of Dale and the fact that over about the last century of the Jarldoms, all but one of the Jarls were descended from this major sort of Caithness figure, and a lot of them had this Caithness background and base. And the fact that the saga quite possibly was written from material from people who were based in Caithness and had better knowledge of Caithness than Orkney and Sutherland. Anyway, I feel like I've talked for a very long time, so I'll end it there. And if anyone wants to f fire some questions at me and embarrass me, there, then please do. Okay.
I'll just say thank you very much for that, Stephen. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really interesting stuff. Certainly changed my perspective on Norse Caithness, and you're doing a good job of putting Caithness on the Norse map, as it were.
Go indeed.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
indeed,
indeed.
and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also really fascinating perspective on the Inga saga and the possibility of the informants of the saga
Mm,
being very
mm.
much Caithness based. And I think many of us might change our perspective of the saga a bit as we're reading it in the future. So thanks for that. That was really
Thank you. Thank
interesting.
you. My pleasure.
Um, and I see we have got a couple of talks, sorry, a couple of questions coming in. So I'll just read these out. The
Okay.
first one is from Drago or Drago.
Hmm.
He says, "Oh, they say, great talk, Stephen.
Thank you.
It's Fran in Orkney here. Ah,
Oh, hello, Fran.
the the username must be different, but yes. So Fran in Orkney says, I'm intrigued by Earl Harold the Young being considered a saint. Do you have
Hmm.
any more information?"
Do I have any more information? I mean, it's referenced in the saga, in the Orkney saga. It says that that the point where he dies, miracles are supposed to have happened, and he's regarded as a saint in Caithness. Um, and as I say, the Reverend Alexander Pope, who writes the forward in the footnotes to Torfaeus, the Icelandic writer who wrote. I think he sort of translated the saga into Latin in the 17th century. Alexander Pope wrote the forward and footnotes to it, which are very they're fascinating. The footnotes because they're all about all these beliefs in Caithness about how also like every Neolithic standing stone is regarded as the site of the death of a famous Norse person. So but all sorts of associations are made a bit about sort of milestones and things in Caithness that are all supposedly Norse based, even though they probably weren't. But he mentions about Harold the Young still being considered a saint, and James T. Calder in his History of Caithness as well. Although he may be basing a lot of what he wrote on what Pope wrote, but he too talks about the Harold the Young still being considered a saint. They don't go into great detail about this or precisely how anybody celebrates this, but they do say that that belief is still strongly there. But but beyond the Inga saga, beyond Alexander Pope, beyond James T. Calder, I don't have a lot more information on that. But there may be. I'd be fascinated to know if anybody knows if there is more information about Harold the Young's saintly reputation. Because of course you're writing a book on saints, Fran, aren't you? So you'll be trying to find out more about saints. Sorry, I don't know if I should have said that or not.
Well, that's a very interesting answer, Stephen. Thanks. And
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone knows more about that, feel free to
Mm,
put that in the chat as well.
mm.
And then we've got a couple of comments. Just Catherine says thank you. Says very interesting talk, Stephen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And then we also have Jenny Blaine. Um, just missed some of the talk and asks if there will be a recording, and I can answer that. Yes, the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, Scottish Society for Northern Studies.
We also
Um,
have we also have about 50 minutes left, so I could do the whole thing again if you like.
well, I don't think we need to cover
Yeah,
that
yeah.
again. But Karen says thank you for says fabulous talk and very interesting, and particularly love your illustrations. If you
Thank
could
you.
see, this is an interesting question. If
Yeah.
you could see any site excavated in historic Caithness, in connection with the Jarls, what would you choose?
Oh my goodness me. Well, yeah, it depends. It depends how if we were to extend Caithness to Old Caithness, including Sutherland, it would be fantastic to find if Jarl Seother, who was supposedly buried after being killed by a decapitated head. If we could verify that he was I think some serious digging up around the River Oikel and Dornoch to try and find if he's down there somewhere. That would be good, I think. Um, but I suppose yeah, as I say, having grown up in Thurso, it would be good if we could, if there was something of Thurso Castle left somewhere. I would like to I would like to there's a big long road called Castle Green Road in Thurso without a castle to be seen anywhere near it. So whether the idea was that this was where the castle was, I'm not sure. But
On
it's all.
the topic of landmarks, I'm just
Mm,
going to throw in a question of my own here
mm,
quickly. Um, so I know that Ousdale, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Ousdale Brock has
mm.
sort of is where you have that traditional border between
Yeah, yeah,
Caithness and Sutherland.
yeah.
Um, I've always wondered about the border on the western side of Caithness
Mm, mm.
in North Scotland. If you have any thoughts on where that would lie, would Caithness, North Caithness, have extended all the way to Cape Wrath, or
Well,
would it?
I mean, it would have, yeah, because it includes it was basically the north of Scotland down to the River Oikel, the Moray Firth. So yes, it would have included all of what was currently Sutherland. I mean, having said that, I think there's probably a lot of debate and discussion as to how complete the Norse control over that area consistently
Mm,
was, and whether it was more the north and eastern coast of Caithness that always were definitely within the Norse control, and whether the wider area maybe slipped in and out of their control a bit. So we're not quite sure. But in terms of when the times when they were, ruling all of what was Caithness at that time, then yes, it included all of Sutherland. So it would have been out to Cape Wrath, and yeah, it was just like that whole top chunk of
yeah.
Scotland.
Okay. Thank you. And I see. We have this question. So hi, Stephen. It's Matt B. Um,
Hey,
at the end
hello,
there,
Matt.
how did it happen that the King of Scotland took over when it was uh, the Norway slanted Jarl that killed him?
When it was the Norway. Oh, what you mean when the Jarl was killed? Do you mean when Jarl Jon died at the end? Uh,
I believe that's what's meant.
so he was killed by the steward of the King of Norway, but not on the orders of the King of Norway. The King of Norway was not happy that Jarl Jon had been killed. That was not the way things were supposed to go. So he actually so a number of the people involved in the murder and the killing of Jarl Jon were executed by the King of Norway afterwards, although not the actual main people themselves. His steward wasn't executed. The guy Snykotler, who was the sort of pretender to the Jarldoms, he wasn't executed, although he was the King of Norway. Did keep him at his court with him. But
Mm,
it's really interesting that the King of Norway didn't seem to be that bothered about well, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but he didn't seem to be that concerned about the end of the Norse line of Jarls. And I think there's a few reasons for that, which is that he retained control over Orkney and Shetland anyway. The 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 the, the Norse line of Jarls was kind of replaced by a line of Jarls from Angus, but we're pretty sure that they were. This is where it's slightly vague to talk about ending. I mean, the concept of endings in histories is problematic, isn't it? The idea that an era ends here and another one starts there is not how things happen, and it's not how people experience it at the time. Mostly, I think. And I think the Jarls who took over were probably still related, actually, in a more distant way to the Norse line of Jarls. There are still a lot of Jarl Magnuses who turn up um, after after the Norse line is supposedly gone. So that I think that shows that the name Magnus recurs among Jarls for quite a long time afterwards, which suggests that I think one theory is, if you remember, uh, the final Jarl, Jon, had to give his daughter as hostage to the King of Scotland, and a theory is that that was for the purposes of marriage, and that so he married her off to a Scottish aristocrat, and this is possibly why the Earls of Angus became the Earls of Caithness and Orkney and Shetland, because that they had a marital connection to the Norse line, possibly. Do you know, Matt, I am probably not answering your question at all here. I've flown off onto a few tangents, but essentially, Caithness still remains a bit of a no man's land. It doesn't it doesn't. It's debatable how much the King of Scotland, how long it takes for Kings of Scotland to really fully say that they're in control of Caithness. Probably you might even be going into the 15th century before they're really kind of
Ooh,
totally. Um, it's a bit of it remains a bit of a wild no man's land.
that's really interesting, Stephen. The executions that take place for the
Mm.
murder of Jarl Jorn,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
in Haukon Saga, isn't it? Haukon
yes,
Saga,
yes, yes,
Haukon's.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
yes, when you have the expedition along the coast of Scotland in
Mm.
1263, when Haukon comes to Scotland,
Mm.
it's interesting to look at the how Caithness is referred to there as well, with tribute
Yes,
collected
yes,
from the
yes.
coast, as
That's
if
that.
it's still an ambiguous area, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. And the actual Earl of Caithness, who was nominally Scottish, really at that point, I think he disappeared. I think he sort of went. I think he kind of went. I think he went to Orkney and hid while Håkon was in Caithness. Demanding tributes from the folk of Caithness. And the folk of Caithness, I think, weren't too impressed with their jarl that he'd disappeared when when
Understandable,
Håkon
yes,
arrived.
yes,
But yeah, that is an interesting one because as I say, by and large, kings of Norway didn't tend to regard Caithness as their territory, but there are these kind of shows of strength from now and again, and these incursions like that of Håkon there.
yeah. And Matt says that yes, you were answering his question,
Oh, good, good.
and
Thank you.
also that the ambiguous place of Caithness
Yes,
is well played out today with the slight rebellion uh, to Gallic signs in
yes, yes,
Caithness. So
yes, yes.
yes,
There was somebody I suspected of being the guilty party in that one, he explained to me he was geographically not in that part of Caithness at the time, so I won't name any names. But anyway,
let's see.
yeah.
Had a convenient alibi, perhaps. Um, well, I think that's all the questions, unless anyone else wants to add anything in the chat. Um,
Thank you very
uh,
much. I'll toast everybody with my Have a Norse Day mug there
Thank you.
for listening in and watching it. So hope you had fun.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for giving this talk. It was really interesting, and thank you everyone who came along. I'll just um, I'll just add that for next month we'll be having a seminar, and the speaker is Dr. William Waters, a postdoctoral scholar at Ohio State University, and he will be presenting on folklore in the age of algorithms and AI. So
Wow.
something very different.
Yes, indeed.
And that will be on Tuesday, the 16th of June at 7 p.m. So thank you again, Stephen, and
Oh, thank
thanks
you, Peter,
everyone.
for thank you and for having me. And thank you
Okay.
everybody for watching.
And many thanks coming in the chat as well. So goodbye.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Bye.